So often the tests that we most fear, when we finally accept them, turn out instead to be blessings. It seems almost like God's joke on us, that He makes His will seem like the last thing we want, and everything else seem more attractive. And yet those who follow anything else don't get what they want. And those who say, I have faith that you know what you're doing and I'm going to do it, suddenly find that, wow, that was the only possible answer. Again and again I've heard this story from people who finally went through a test, finally passed it, and said, oh, I see now, it was just a blessing. Everything was what had to be. Everything was right. If you reach that point, as this woman did, you will probably find, as she did, that she reached also that point where suddenly life was so wonderful that she just felt this delicious sense of, we have our subject today, radiant well-being. That's exactly what she felt. This sense of radiant well-being, that her whole body was just tingling with joy. And in the story, it says that she was asked to look at a rose and tell the rose to come down to her. And she looked at the rose, and the rose did come down to her. That seems fanciful, doesn't it? You know, Yogananda, who was a great saint, one time was giving a dictation in his room in Encinitas. And there was a rose in a vase next to his chair. He went to, somebody called him to the door, and he went to the door and talked, and his secretary, who was sitting there taking dictation from him, saw that the rose was pointing at the door. And she said, that's strange, I could have sworn that it was pointing toward the chair. And then he came back and he was dictating, and she happened to notice, she hadn't really taken it seriously yet, but she noticed that it was pointing toward the chair, toward him. And she thought, my gosh, that's strange. Somebody else called him to the door, and he went, and after a bit she looked, and the rose was pointing toward the door. This happened 2 or 3 times, and then she said, sir, you have a new devotee. That rose stayed fresh for 18 days, and then she discovered that there had been no water in the vase. In other words, what I'm saying, and this may sound purely poetic to you, and I won't blame you at all if you think so, because I must say that there was a time a few years ago when I would have said so too. I would have scoffed at the idea. If I don't scoff at such things now, it's because I at least can claim to you that I have seen it. But there was a time when I couldn't believe it. And yet, we have read things that even plants are conscious, haven't we? And that they do respond to love, that they do respond to good vibrations and positive vibrations. There were 2 plants planted on either side of a walk, and the same plants were given exactly the same treatment, but one was given love in addition to that treatment, and the other was given opprobrium, cursing it, saying, why are you living? I don't want you. That one died, and the other one flourished. There are stories like this that are becoming pretty common. And so we begin to realize that we're living in a living world, and that the kind of life that we put out is the life that we get back from it. That if we live with joy, we get joy back from the world. And if we live with sorrow, that is what is justified by the world. If we have the right attitudes, if we have the right consciousness, if we live in the right way, then we will find that all these other treatments work too. We could take those 2 plants and use them as an illustration to our own lives. Both plants were given all the food they needed, all the right treatment they needed. So also some people get all the right diet, all the right exercise, everything, and somehow still they languish. And others get it or don't get it and somehow live. If you have the right food and also live in the right way, then you will indeed be radiant and well, even at the point of death.